Hollow Knight is one of the most immersive and atmospheric games that I've ever had the privilege to play. By complementing its fantastic level design with fascinating lore and memorable characters, Team Cherry was able to create a truly unforgettable world that's a joy to explore. Each area of the sprawling kingdom of Hallownest is special and uniquely crafted with its own music, aesthetic, enemies, and upgrades that help them stand apart from one another. Uncovering all the hidden content in this vast land is as exciting as it is mysterious, and whether it's collecting useful charms or slaying powerful enemies, unearthing Hollow Knight's secrets is a blast from beginning to end. With so much to love about each of the 15 areas that make up Hallownest, one question springs to mind. Which section is best? Well, today I'm going to attempt to answer that question by taking a close look at each one to see what they bring to the table. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below, and welcome to every Hollow Knight area ranked. One of the best aspects in any Metroidvania is the feeling of freedom that comes in the late game when you're fully upgraded and can finally maneuver fluidly around the map. A perfect example of this is traversing the fungal waste after collecting Isma's Tear, as the pesky acid water that caused you so much grief in the early game is now no longer a concern. It makes getting around feel so much more satisfying because there's a sense of growth and power that allows you to feel like you can take on anything, which is exactly the opposite of how roaming Fog Canyon feels. At no point does it become less frustrating to traverse Fog Canyon thanks to the abundance of big, stupid jellyfish that heat-seek to and explode on the night, as well as the pulsating electric enemies that are easy to get hit by if you're impatient. Now, it may or may not be true that the impetus for me making this list was when I lost over 10,000 Geo going for the charm notch hidden in this area. This particular room is hell to navigate through with bomb-like orange gas bubbles littered everywhere that explode on impact. However, my saltiness put aside, there are other negatives that bring this area to the bottom of the list. Chief among them is Umu, who has to be among the 2 or 3 most underwhelming bosses in the game because of the way it takes control away from the player. Although I enjoy the inclusion of Quirrell in this fight, forcing the player to wait until he creates an opening feels wrong, like it goes against all of Hollow Knight's core gameplay philosophies. Still, Fog Canyon isn't all bad as it has a memorable aesthetic that feels mysterious and is complemented by a dreamy music track that does a great job at immersing the player. I love exploring the teacher's archive, Umu excluded, and typically will always choose Monomon as the first dreamer to take out for that reason. We also get my favorite spell in Fog Canyon, the Howling Wraiths, which helps to balance out my issues with it. Unfortunately, there's not one section in Hollow Knight that annoys me as much as Fog Canyon consistently does, which is why it is an easy pick for the worst area in Hollow Knight, despite offering a bit more than our next few entries. In a game filled with great music, immersive atmospheres, and unforgettable moments, the Royal Waterways really leave a lot to be desired. Even though I love the Dung Defender with all my heart and soul, the Royal Waterways are unremarkable and feel completely forgettable. Even though the flukes can only be found here, they are all so incredibly easy to defeat, including the Fluke Marm boss, that it often feels like you were just passing through the Royal Waterways to get somewhere else. Honestly, if it wasn't for the entrance to the God Home being located in the Junk Pit, this may be the area of the game that I spend the least amount of time in because it's just not that interesting. It's a weird case where I don't think it is even necessarily a poorly designed area, just one that doesn't leave a strong impression. The music is fitting but not very catchy or memorable. The enemies are disgusting and appropriate for a sewer setting but get overshadowed by so many superior foes. And the aesthetic is solid, yet so weak compared to the other areas in the game. Perhaps if there was lore to discover through the waste you find in the pipes, this area could have left a bigger impact on me, but truthfully, I don't know how to fix an area like this. In a lot of instances when I'm criticizing something, I try to give suggestions of how I could make it better, but this is one instance in which I'm not sure how to improve the Royal Waterways without turning it into something it isn't meant to be. I know it's pretty much universally regarded as one of the worst areas in Hollow Knight, and unfortunately I have to agree, which is why it gets the second worst rank on this list. I am a gameplay first type of person, but there is no denying how much the lore of Hollow Knight fascinates me. I think that's why I have a soft spot for the Hive, because despite having virtually no role in the events of the game, as well as being disconnected from the rest of Hollow Nest, it really inspires my imagination. Seeing a fully fleshed out kingdom, complete with its own set of enemies and lore, opens up a host of possibilities and shows the endless potential of Hollow Knight's setting. I can't help but wonder what other tribes are in or just outside Hollow Nest that could have gone unnoticed all this time, and it makes me want to be able to explore the kingdom's outskirts to see what else I can find. Unfortunately, the Hive is quite small with not a lot to collect, so for as much as it inspires me, it disappoints all the same. Luckily, I've only played the Void Heart edition of Hollow Knight, so I've only ever experienced the updated final version of the Hive, otherwise I'm sure it would be in the bottom spot. Truth be told, without the fight against the Hive Knight, this area would not offer up a lot of substance to justify being anywhere but the bottom spot. I really enjoy the puzzle of luring a Hive Guardian over to break open the path to the area's Mask Shard, and the Hive Blood Charm can be somewhat useful in boss fights you're struggling with, but that's about all there is to find outside a grub or two. Because of this, there's virtually no reason to ever return to the Hive outside of one part of the Grim Troop quest, and because it's so disconnected from the rest of the map, you'll never just stumble across it either. As such, it's easy to forget, which for me prevents it from ranking any higher. At number 12, we have the Howling Cliffs, which serve as Hollow Nest's barrier to the outside world on its west end. This desolate place isn't very populated and carries with it a sense of danger unlike what is found elsewhere in the kingdom. Rather than being assaulted by deadly traps and enemies, you are confronted with the fear of the unknown. Although you can never venture into the world beyond Hollow Nest, the knowledge that bugs lose sapience upon venturing outside the kingdom gives the Howling Cliffs an unsettling atmosphere. With its mounds of husks in the background showing the grim reality of a land without civilization, it really feels like you're at the edge of the world. Much like the Hive, this really gets my mind going as to what is outside of the land of Hollow Nest, and as a result, it's easy for me to be immersed in its environment. Beyond that, learning the Cyclone Slash from Nailmaster Mato and discovering the Stag Nest are two of my favorite moments in Hollow Knight, and both take place in the Howling Cliffs. Mato's dialogue after learning his nail art has always made him so endearing, and I love how he feels honored to have you under his tutelage. Likewise, the last stag stands out for his excited dialogue after rediscovering the Stag Nest. It's hard not to be happy for him as he talks about the possibility of other stags journeying beyond the lands of Hollow Nest, and it feels good to see him have that hope. Honestly, one of Team Cherry's greatest strengths is in their ability to make you care about the various NPCs throughout the game, and both Mato and the Last Stag stand out among my favorites. Of course, there are other things to discover in the Howling Cliffs as well, such as the Nightmare Lantern Chamber and the Joni's Blessing Charm, but those two character interactions are what I love most about this area of Hollow Nest. Despite a soft spot for the Crystal Guardian and his enhanced, enraged form, the Crystal Peak section of Hollow Nest lands just outside the top 10. What holds it back from reaching any higher for me really comes down to the enemies found within, as aside from those found in Fog Canyon, the various crystal enemies might be some of the most annoying to deal with in the game. After the area is fully unlocked, it's easy enough to bypass them, but that initial trek can be frustrating if you aren't patient. That said, by no means do I think that the Crystal Peak is a bad area, and it's still an enjoyable environment to explore despite some troublesome creatures. Reaching Hollow Nest's crown, for example, stands out as particularly memorable thanks to its serene and oddly relaxing ambience. It beautifully contrasts the loud and vibrant pinks of the industrial mines below, and it feels like you can finally be at ease for a second and catch your breath. It helps that you get a useful pale ore piece as well, giving you peace of mind that your journey back into Hollow Nest will be at least somewhat easier than it was before. I'm also quite fond of the Crystal Heart found here that gives the knight a super dash because of how much it opens up the game, and also because it just feels great to use. With that in mind, there's nothing glaringly wrong with this section of the map, and really the only criticism I have is that it doesn't feel all that important to the story. There's not a lot of lore to be found here outside the broken Radiant statue in Hollow Nest's crown, and as such, Crystal Peak feels somewhat disconnected from the rest of Hollow Nest. Again, this doesn't mean I think Crystal Peak is subpar or anything, just that there are other areas in Hollow Knight that leave a bigger impact. The Forgotten Crossroads is one of the trickiest areas to rank because despite a ton of content, I don't feel the same strong connection to this place that I do for others in the game. Perhaps it is because Hollow Knight is such a massive game and this is the first area you explore that these crossroads really do get forgotten, but something about this area fails to leave an impression on me. I will admit it is really cool how the area becomes infected due to the weakened seal on the black egg, but the novelty quickly wears off when you realize how much more frustrating it becomes to navigate this area. Not only do we have to deal with infected enemies that will explode upon death, but certain passageways are blocked off, making it more tedious than it needs to be to get around. Overall, I'm not really sure what it is about this place that makes me feel so indifferent about it. This is the home of the Grubfather, a fantastic source of geo and upgrades throughout the game. It's the place where you get the Vengeful Spirit spell, as well as the extremely useful Soul Catcher charm. It's the scene of the game's finale, as well as 2 additional endings to the story. And there are neat hidden interactions like finding MrDrBoi fixing signs, or watching Mila the cheery miner eventually succumb to the infection. Yet even with 6 separate boss fights and features like Salubra's Charm Shop, I can't help but feel this area belongs in Hollownest's bottom half. Maybe it's because we spend so much time here between returning to the Temple of the Black Egg and the Grub Home that this area doesn't feel as special, but as it's not the only place we revisit multiple times, I'm not entirely confident that that's the reason either. All I know for sure is I don't feel strongly one way or another about the Forgotten Crossroads, despite it being a solid area with a nice ambient music track. I am by no means a Hollow Knight expert, but as someone who has achieved 112% completion on multiple files, I am consistently blown away by all the stuff I discover online that I miss throughout my playthroughs. Nothing encapsulates that feeling better than the Shrine of Believers found in the Resting Grounds that can be reached by dream nailing a specific moth statue in the Spirit's Glade. Not only is it really cool that Team Cherry honored their backers in this way, but it is a secret that reinvigorated my love for Hollownest's world design when I learned of its existence. It made me wonder what else hadn't been found in this densely packed world, and it made me extremely excited to see what Silksong will bring to the table with an entire new land full of hidden goodies to uncover. Aside from its secrets, the Resting Ground also has one of my favorite music tracks in the game that gives me great incentive to stay in the area exploring for as long as I can. Music is an extremely subjective topic, yet so important to the world of Hollownest, and I can't think of an area in the game that is enhanced more by its track than the Resting Grounds are. Its melancholic nature beautifully sets the tone for the area and makes it a perfect place to learn of the Dreamers and their sacrifice. Similarly, I couldn't imagine a better location for the Grey Mourner to reside, as her quest wouldn't feel nearly as emotional without the setting you acquire it in. Along with receiving the incredibly useful Dream Nail ability from the Seer and discovering the source of the rain in the City of Tears, the Resting Grounds has many praiseworthy moments, but fails to reach higher on the list due to a lack of gameplay balance. Although it would feel thematically wrong to be constantly under attack here, I can't help but feel that the Resting Grounds would have been a bit better with an additional Dream Boss or 2. Zero is alright, albeit fairly unremarkable, but considering we have largely combat-free areas like Dirtmouth and the Ancient Basin to explore, I would have liked to see the Resting Grounds have slightly more combat, even if the fights were kept optional. Now, this isn't truly a big deal, and admittedly is more of me splitting hairs to justify ranking a phenomenal area in the bottom half of this list. On its own, the Ancient Basin really doesn't do a lot for me and would probably be my pick for the area with the worst aesthetic in the game. It doesn't have much in the way of upgrades and generally feels pretty empty. However, what it lacks in collectibles, it makes up for in important lore, as the area contains 2 sections which are crucial to understanding Hollow Knight's story. With that in mind, both the White Palace and the Abyss help make the Ancient Basin one of Hollownest's best areas, as without them this former holding ground of the Pale King's Palace would be among the bottom spots on this list. The White Palace in particular really elevates this area by providing a difficult platforming challenge that serves as a nice palate cleanse to the rest of Hollow Knight's combat and exploration-driven gameplay. While it can be quite frustrating at times, the satisfaction of completing it, especially its Path of Pain, is on par with defeating any of Hollow Knight's toughest bosses. On the other hand, the Abyss, while not heavy on gameplay, provides 2 important upgrades for the knight as well as important story information that completes the game's puzzle-like narrative. These 2 sections stand out as strongly as any other area in the game, and along with the euphoric double jump upgrade found here, solidify the Ancient Basin as one of Hollow Knight's best areas. Part of what makes Hollow Knight so great is that despite a completely silent protagonist and a largely desolate world, there are still many endearing characters you can encounter along your journey. The very first, Elderbug, makes his home in Dirtmouth, and while at first he is alone, over the course of your adventure he will be joined by an eclectic cast of memorable characters. Iselda, Tiso, Cloth, Sly the Nailmaster, the Grim Troop, Beretta, and of course Zote all show up in this small village if you take the right actions, and it makes the world of Hallownest feel alive and active. As Metroidvanias are all about progression, this is an aspect of Dirtmouth that I really admire, as it gives the knight a different way to measure his progress outside of combat and exploration. For this reason, Dirtmouth remains as one of the few areas in the game that is regularly worth revisiting to see how things have changed. For some, this might not justify its position in this ranking, but in my mind it makes Dirtmouth essential to the tone and feel of Hollow Knight. While it lacks the exploration element that helps other areas in the game shine, it makes up for it by having tons of valuable content that feel crucial to your success throughout the game. As a result, few things in the game are as satisfying as beating a tough boss or unlocking a new stagway only to return to the surface of Hallownest for some rest and retooling. Not only are you always greeted with calming, tranquil music upon your arrival, but as Dirtmouth gradually comes back to life, you are also given a sense of just how busy the world of Hallownest must have originally been. Each return visit feels like a check-in on how you're faring in your adventure, and it breaks up the gauntlet that is Hallownest in a satisfying way. Combine all that with the fact that 2 of Hollow Knight's best bosses are found here in the Nightmare King Grim and the Grey Prince Zote, and it becomes clear why Dirtmouth belongs in the top half of this ranking. Team Cherry are truly fantastic storytellers, and Hollow Knight is filled with many emotionally impactful moments. NPCs you think will be completely forgettable wind up making the biggest impacts on you in the end, and Cloth's involvement in the Traitor Lord fight is a prime example of what I'm talking about. Though this is possible to miss, as long as you encounter Cloth in the Ancient Basin, she will appear in this fight to help you, sacrificing herself to help you open the way to the White Lady. I've always loved this scene because Cloth is a likable character that has a simple goal to die in an epic battle so she can be reunited with her departed Nola. Learning that she is not quite as confident in her abilities as she originally displayed, but pushes forward anyway because of the way the knight has inspired her, makes her sacrifice a wholesome yet bittersweet moment that transforms an otherwise mediocre fight against the Traitor Lord into one of Hollow Knight's best. It's a defining moment of the Queen's Gardens, and on its own elevates this area of the game past many of the places in Hallownest we've already discussed. Additionally, the Queen's Gardens slips into the top half of Hollow Knight's areas thanks to its elegant music and overall aesthetic, which is my personal favorite in the entire game. The dark greens and numerous lanterns in the background give the area a majestic feel, which is perfect for the setting of the home of the White Lady. I also love the vegetation and overgrown nature of the Queen's Gardens, including the abundance of thorns that make platforming interesting, though I am sorry for those who have PTSD from the Grey Mourner's delicate flower mission. Truthfully, it's hard to find flaws with this area, and the only thing keeping it out of the top 5 is the fact that other sections in the game offer a bit more to do while having just as many quality aspects as the Queen's Gardens. When I think of the Kingdom's Edge, the first thing that comes to mind is the Colosseum of Fools that hosts several combat trials. While the first 2 trials are somewhat easy, it's the third trial, the Trial of the Fool, that makes this arena so noteworthy. Aside from the Pantheon of Hallownest, this would be my pick for the most challenging task in Hollow Knight due to how unrelenting it can be at times. 17 waves of enemies must be defeated, with little to no rest between waves, and when all is said and done, a new boss is thrown at you in the form of the God Tamer. Personally, this was the most rage-inducing section of Hollow Knight for me, but also one of the most rewarding, and the achievement of clearing it is something that I'm still proud of. Of course, like with all things Hollow Knight, you can find runs online of people clearing this with no hits, no upgrades, and other crazy modifications, but that shouldn't take away from how impressive clearing this trial actually is. Outside of the Coliseum of Fools, the Kingdom's Edge is also where we have our second showdown with Hornet just outside the cast-off shell. This fight, while not nearly as challenging as the Coliseum of Fools, is still meaningful because it grants us access to the King's brand, which allows us to progress the story in a significant way. We not only get access to the Abyss, which unlocks several additional endings for Hollow Knight, but we also get to briefly examine the original worm form of the Pale King before it is blocked off for the rest of the game. Along with the ability to encounter Bardoon, these events really help sell the mystique and lore of Hallownest and give the Kingdom's Edge a sacred and divine quality. However, despite having an engaging combat trial and significant story implications, the reason I can't place the Kingdom's Edge any higher comes down to its enemies and environment. I am firmly in the fuck Primal Aspids camp, so any area that contains them instantly drops a little in my book. Additionally, maneuvering around the Kingdom's Edge is not as fluid as other areas, and I've always found it to be a little tedious to backtrack to the Colosseum, for example. Even with that in mind, the Kingdom's Edge is a fantastic area that I really had to struggle to find faults in, and whether it's interacting with Nailmaster Oro or acquiring the infinitely useful Quick Slash charm, there's a lot to love about Hallownest's easternmost area. As someone who isn't particularly fond of the horror genre, and who also has a deep hatred of spiders, I was not expecting to rank Deep Nest this high. When I think of my love for Hollow Knight, my mind certainly doesn't race here, and in fact I somewhat dread this section of the game when I get to it. The design is cramped with danger lurking around every corner, and the enemies here are as aggressively hostile as any places you will find in the game. It's anxiety-inducing and makes exploring more difficult because you're constantly distracted in combat, preventing you from closely examining your surroundings to map the layout of the area to memory. And then to top it all off, there is no real music to speak of, giving you no way to be distracted from the weird creatures and off-putting noises you'll encounter in your pursuit of Hera the Beast. So, why have I ranked it in the top 5 then? Well, it's mainly because without Deep Nest, I don't think Hollow Knight would be nearly the incredible experience that it is. As much as I dislike the theme of this area, and as suffocating as its level design may be at times, Deep Nest allows me to appreciate the beauty in the rest of Hollow Knight's areas. The knowledge of this place and its disgusting inhabitants serves as a constant reminder of just how horrific things can be, which in turn lets me appreciate the lush greens of the Queen's Gardens and the bright pinks of Crystal Peak. Deep Nest is so effective at creating an atmosphere that players want to get out of, and deserves credit for eliciting emotion arguably better than any other area in the game. Past that, Deep Nest also has some of the most fascinating lore in Hollow Knight, and I'm very curious to see how much we learn about the Weavers in Silksong. The fact that they came from a different land and rejected the Pale King's rule entirely is extremely interesting, and has me curious as to what their kingdom was like before the infection took over. Hera is a very compelling figure, and talking to the midwife to learn of her deal with the Pale King to create Hornet makes me wonder what she was like before becoming a dreamer. With so many discoveries that intrigue me, and an atmosphere that evokes powerful emotions, it'd feel wrong to place Deep Nest anywhere but the top 5. Entering Green Path for the first time is when all the hype surrounding Hollow Knight began to make sense. While I was enjoying the game prior to entering this area, going from the blue, muted colors and mysterious ambience of the Forgotten Crossroads to the lively greens and energetic soundtrack of Green Path was a completely magical experience. The sense of awe and wonder I felt exploring this overgrown place was so engrossing that I couldn't put my controller down until I had done everything I could do with the upgrades I had. Green Path completely immersed me in its environment in a way that few places in gaming can do, and for that initial experience alone, I'd place it among Hollow Knight's best areas. However, Green Path offers so much more than just the serene landscape, and the chase and fight with Hornet stands out as another powerful moment that hooked me into the world of Hallownest. When you begin Hollow Knight, you really don't know much about the plot of the game, but Hornet's comments before the fight, and the Dreamer's message after the fight show you that there is a lot more of this game to uncover. This is something Green Path is great at doing, as I felt similarly when coming across the Hunter, and again later on when finding Un, and it motivated me to want to comb the land of Hollowness to see what else I could find. Green Path also excels because of its enemy diversity, with tons of different Mosskin enemies to go along with the Vengeflies and Husks of the Forgotten Crossroads. In particular, I enjoy the Moss Knight enemy, as it felt like the first normal foe that I had to take somewhat seriously. While the bosses outside of Hornet don't do much to impress me, the sheer volume of different creatures to do battle with really help Green Path feel fresh throughout. They teach you so much about the game's combat, and when I leave this area, I feel like my skills are a lot more sharp than when I entered, which is how I wish I felt leaving every new area. Honestly, what stops Green Path from being in either of the top 2 spots is my personal preference for the areas I've ranked above it, but if you were to tell me Green Path is the best area, you'd get no arguments from me, as the top 3 areas in Hollow Knight are all in a tier of their own. If I had to choose one sub-area or room as my favorite in Hollow Knight, there's no doubt that the Mantis Village would be my pick. There isn't a single place in Hollowness that gripped me more than this area did, and by itself elevates the Fungal Waste into the top 2 of this ranking. We'll touch on some of the Fungal Waste's other strengths in a second, but first we need to examine what makes the Mantis Village so incredible. The obvious place to start is with the fight against the Mantis Lords, which stands out for its excellent gameplay and superb presentation. This boss battle set the bar extremely high for all future fights in the game, and despite Hollow Knight's extensive catalog of bosses, few actually match or surpass the quality that we see here. One of the elements that makes this particular conflict so noteworthy is the fact that in addition to unlocking access to deepness after winning, the Mantises now bow in respect to you when you encounter them in the overworld. Of course, this does not extend to the traitor Mantises in the Queen's Gardens, but the entire Mantis Village acknowledges your strength and allows you safe passage in their land. This shows their strong wills and resistance to the infection, and gives the Mantises a defined character that other tribes in Hollowness lack, while rewarding the player for their accomplishment in a unique way. However, if that isn't enough for you, we also get access to one of the best charms in the entire game, the Mark of Pride, which dramatically increases the range of your nail. This charm is insanely useful, and along with the game-altering Mantis Claw that grants the knight the ability to wall jump, make the Mantis Village one of the most valuable locations to visit in the game. Outside the fantastic Mantis Village, the Fungal Waste impressed me with its level design and various character interactions. We meet the fungus-loving Willow, Leg-Eater and his useful Fragile Charm Shop, and Beretta who can be rescued and returned to Dirtmouth, as well as Quirrell who's encountered not once, but twice, and Hornet who we have another run-in with near the entrance to the City of Tears. In each new playthrough, I look forward to the abundance of other life that we can find in the Fungal Waste, as it's comforting whenever we meet another citizen of Hollownest. And although it can be a little challenging the first time you try to cross the Fungal Waste to meet these bugs, I love the design of this area because it complements the upgrades you'll get later on in a very empowering way. Nothing feels quite as good as returning to the Fungal Waste with Isma's Tear and the Monarch Wings to swiftly maneuver through tricky sections that gave you trouble the first time through. It's a tangible way to see how much you've grown since the beginning of the game, which is why it never stops being nice to be able to breathe a sigh of relief after missing a jump and accidentally falling into an acid pool. I know it isn't a perfect area, and I can understand why some might find this section of the game frustrating, but to me it captures so much of what makes Hollow Knight a modern classic, which is why I've ranked it as the game's second best area. If entering Green Path was the moment in Hollow Knight that things started to click for me, then coming upon the City of Tears for the first time was absolutely when I knew that this was one of my favorite games of all time. It genuinely blew my mind that even after the outstanding Green Path and the tremendous Fungal Waste that Hollow Knight still had not revealed its best hand to me, and it was in that instance that I knew I was playing a masterpiece. The City of Tears captivated me with its rainy atmosphere and soothing music, but truly impressed with its open level design and droves of content. By the end of the game, this will be the area you likely spend the most time in, yet it never gets old because there is always something to do when you come back. You can take the relics you find throughout Hollowness to Lem to earn large amounts of Geo. You can upgrade your nail with the pale ore you've discovered on your journey by going to the Nailsmith. You can unlock the Tower of Love and defeat the Collector to earn a useful map of all the grubs in Hollow Nest. You can slay Lurien the Watcher and defeat the Watcher Knights that guard him to progress the main plot. You can climb to the Soul Sanctum to earn the Desolate Dive spell and the Shade Soul upgrade for the Vengeful Spirit, and I could go on and on. At first I wasn't sure if I was going to rank the City of Tears in the top spot, but once I began to examine the contents of each area closely, the answer became obvious. Even if it may not have the best song, or the best boss, or the best aesthetic, or even the best lore, everything it does have is near the top of what Hollow Knight has to offer. I will never forget moments like the first time I came across the statue of the Hollow Knight, or overlooking the city while sitting on a bench with Quirrell. I'll always remember finding the pleasure home and getting all my hard-earned geo back from the banker thief. And the satisfaction of beating the Soul Tyrant for the first time is a feeling that will always come to mind when thinking of this game. Bottom line, the City of Tears contains every quality that I love about Hollow Knight, which is why it is deserving of being ranked number 1. Although I already knew how terrific the Kingdom of Hollow Nest was, completing this ranking gave me a whole new appreciation of the quality found in this title. This was one of the toughest rankings I've made because it was so hard to find faults in Team Cherry's brilliant world. Every area has something worth admiring, and picking ranks often felt like coin flips that could have gone either way. Truth be told, if you asked me to redo this video in a few years after another playthrough or two, I wouldn't be surprised if this list changed because there seems to always be something new to appreciate in each of Hollow Knight's areas. With that in mind, be sure to let me know what your favorite area in Hollow Knight is and why. And remember, if you like this type of content, to like and subscribe to stay tuned for my next video. Thanks for watching.